I completely forgot that I've had quite a bad back recently, so sitting and playing the cajon for 15 minutes probably wasn't the best call. So if I like suddenly sort of go, ah, it's not like a moment, I'm just probably in pain. Cool. So, no, not yet, not yet. Spoilers. Pretend you hadn't seen that. So anyway, Happy New Year, everybody. So next week, Andrew's going to be starting / continuing a series in Romans. So Andrew did something from Romans last week, and we thought, oh, it'd be nice to have a whole series in Romans. So if our series in Acts is anything to go by, we'll be in Romans for the next 4 years, probably. But no, we're just doing chapter 1 of Romans, so hopefully that will only be a few weeks. But if we carry on, then yeah, we'll be there forever. Heather in Facebook, I think, advertised today as like a one-off special, something like from Jon, a one-off special, which, if you hadn't guessed, was code for we don't know what it is yet. Because we hadn't worked out, well, I say we, I hadn't worked out what I was preaching on at that point. So I thought, it's New Year, you know, preach something inspiring and encouraging, something that will spur people on and encourage people. And I thought, nah. I thought, it's dark, it's wet, we've all just taken down Christmas decorations, so if you're like me, you may be suffering from what I think is commonly referred to as the Ecclesiastes Blues. So, who's read Ecclesiastes? Cool. Yeah, that's good. It's a weird book. It's wonderful, but very strange. So it was written by Solomon, the author of Proverbs, son of David, King David, also a king himself, and it's kind of, if it would be up there for the contender of the most miserable book of the Bible, second maybe only to Job. It's so, you know, Happy New Year! That's what we'll be looking at today. So why was it written? The commentator Barnes says, Solomon probably first moved to write Ecclesiastes by a mind that was painfully full of the disappointing nature of all things viewed apart from God. So that's what we're looking at today, a book inspired by the misery of Solomon. Yay! Happy New Year! You may be wondering, you know, because it might have been a while since you read it, how bad could it possibly be? So it starts with, meaningless, meaningless, utterly meaningless, everything is meaningless. Yay! So it's really cheery. So to say it's kind of a miserable, mildly depressing book is probably not overstating it. But this meaningless, meaningless, some translations put vanity, vanity, all is vanity. And I looked at the Hebrew for that word, because I thought those were quite two different words, and to be honest, they both seem kind of wrong. The word is hebel, which gets translated, which is actually closer to vapor or breath. So it's all to do with this intangible, you can't really touch it sort of nature of things. So to steal a quote from my favorite Harry Potter film, everything is like smoke. It's like trying to catch smoke with your bare hands. I really liked that quote. I was talking about Sirius Black, but Ryan's probably, Ryan and Sarah will know that, I'm sure. Everyone else is probably going, what? But yeah, sort of just this intangible quality of things. So how does Solomon come to this conclusion? How does he end up at this really dreary conclusion? He comes to it after viewing everything under the sun, and there's this under the sun, under the sun, under the sun, and it goes through the whole of Ecclesiastes. And effectively what he's done is he's looked around at, effectively under the sun is on earth. He's looked at everything on earth and assessed it in its own merit and said everything's a bit rubbish. And he does what is in effect sort of case studies. Almost the whole thing is almost like a bit of an essay with various different arguments for different kind of things. So his first case study, as it was, is wisdom. Who would have thought that the author of Proverbs decided to look at wisdom? You never would have thought that in a million years, would you? Who would have thunk it? But he says, I've looked around, I've gone to different places, heard all the wisest people, read all the smartest books. He's very humbly says, I've acquired more wisdom than anyone who has gone before me. So, you know, maybe acquired wisdom, but not humility along the road. And what's his conclusion after studying wisdom? The author of Proverbs, Mr. Wisdom himself, he says, it's like chasing the wind. He said, actually, it's trying to catch smoke with your bare hands. It's not that great. He, in fact, says, with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. That's like, oh, okay, great. So he's saying that, effectively, the wiser you become, so the more you understand justice, the more injustice upsets you, the more you understand the beauty of peace, the more war upsets you, the more wise you become, the more seeing people being foolish just really winds you up. So actually, wisdom can actually not do you many favors. And he says that wisdom doesn't necessarily result in you being put in the best positions. He says that fools are put in positions, many fools are put in high positions. I couldn't think of any modern examples to reference to that. I couldn't possibly say why the background is wine and cheese. So moving on, he then goes on to pleasure. He says, I denied myself nothing. I refused my heart no pleasure. That is not understating it. So Solomon ended up with 700 wives and 300 concubines. He amassed more stuff than anyone could ever want. He created beautiful buildings and beautiful gardens. And after all that, what's the conclusion that he comes to after assessing pleasure? Also, chasing the wind, trying to catch smoke with your bare hands, that kind of thing. And he says effectively that pleasures are fleeting. Chocolate cake is nice, but chocolate cake is nice when you're eating chocolate cake. When you're not eating chocolate cake, it's not that great. I had an amazing fresh bacon BLT sandwich for lunch that was wonderful today, but I was enjoying that a lot more when it was in my mouth rather than remembering it from about earlier. There's things that pleasure is sort of an in-the-moment kind of thing, and once that moment has passed, the pleasure of it is gone. I really enjoy walks in the sunshine with Heather and Daff, but when you're stuck in the inside and it's raining, walks in the outside are not all that pleasurable. So pleasure has this sort of fleeting quality to it, and it's like, that's chasing the wind as well. So then he moves on to work, says, what do people get for all their toil and anxious striving under the sun? What do you get for being a workaholic? What do you get for working all hours of the day, for having sleepless nights about things in work? What do you get for all those hours and all those worries? What do you get for it? Not a lot, chasing the wind again. So he says, all their days, their work is grief and pain. So, more cheery stuff. But he says, interestingly, that I quite liked, is that a lot of people work out of envy. They'll see other people and see where they've got to in life and go, oh, I want what they have. And so they'll work really hard. And he also says that ultimately, when you die, the work that you've done, you don't know how your predecessor is going to take over it. Makes me think of Apple. When Steve Jobs was around, Apple was the most innovative, creative company ever, in terms of technology. While he was around, you had the invention of the smartphone and the iPad. Those were two revolutionary, game-changing devices. Since Steve Jobs has gone, they've got slightly more capacity, they've got slightly better displays, but actually there's been no device or anything that Apple have announced and you've gone, wow, that's something that's going to completely be a game changer. So actually, to a certain extent, all of Steve Jobs' hard work and creativity and everything he put into Apple, although the guy who's followed him has not done a bad job necessarily, he's not done as good a job as Steve Jobs probably would have done. Then there's an interlude. There's this lovely, there is a season for everything poem. And it's like that. We like seasons as Christians. We're always talking about the current season that we're in and a word in season and all that kind of stuff. And it has this whole lovely bit about God setting eternity in the human heart. And it's all lovely. And then in chapter 3, verse 15, he throws out, what if there was, and there isn't, a Battlestar Galactica translation of the Bible would say, this has all happened before and it will happen again. He actually says that there's this sort of almost futility to the seasons as well. It goes spring, summer, autumn, winter. Then what happens? Spring, summer, autumn. It's a cycle. It goes over and over again. And I feel a bit like, I don't know about you, but I feel a bit like that at the moment, because I try and think back to what it was like this time last year in January. And I remember having to cancel plans, being forced to work from home, being slightly nervous about COVID. Then I think it was Delta rather than Omicron, but actually things are actually not all that different from where they were. Things got better for a bit, but now it's like we've almost gone back into that same season that we had almost last January. It's all annoyingly familiar, and like, didn't we do this already? Have we not gone through this season? And it can be quite frustrating, so I sort of can see that it can be frustrating. It's actually the second time he says that in chapter 1, verses 9 to 10. He also says the same thing about everything has happened before and everything will happen again, which is wonderfully meta because he's literally said it before and it he says it again. So I liked that. That was fun. But he asked the question, is there anything of which one can say, look, this is something new? And he asked that in a sort of rhetorical way that is sort of indicating no. So he then moves on to justice. He says, what about the state of justice and injustice in the world? Is justice winning? And he says, no. He says, I see wickedness in the place of judgment and wickedness in the place of justice. There's so much wickedness out there. Gets frustrated. And I can relate to that too, and I'm sure you can. Over the last 2 years, every time you turn on the news, you just go, oh, injustice is winning. Or injustice is just so strong. And the justice system itself, people who we thought were fighting for justice, like policemen, actually some of them have turned out to be incredibly horrible, wicked people who have done really unjust things. And I was saying to Andrew the other day that I think I've uttered the words people of the worst more in the last 2 years than I've done in the previous 20, because there's just so much racism and hate and people getting annoyed at each other for the stupidest of things and unable to agree to disagree anymore or have opinions without hurting people, and it's all just really painful. And it seems like humanity, I've always known humanity is fallen, humanity fell, but it seems like over the last 2 years, in my eyes certainly, humanity has fallen slightly further, if that makes sense. And then there's this lovely bit that we hear at weddings all the time about a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. Isn't that nice? And that is nestled between a bit about loneliness sucking and a bit about stories of rags to riches being completely pointless. Romance. It's just so random. It just sort of comes out of nowhere. We go, oh, this is lovely bit of, it's really lovely. Everything around it is just really miserable. And then he looks at wealth, he looks at money, and says, you can't take it with you, so what's the point, in effect? Again, your next of kin, if you leave it to them, who knows what they'll do with it. There is a wonderfully random bit in chapter 11 where he just gives what is effectively financial advice. He's about not putting your eggs in one basket and doing multiple different things. It's really random, but quite funny and interesting. And there's some other bits in Ecclesiastes which I won't go into further detail on, but such highlights as everyone dies, it could happen at any moment, life's unpredictable, and if you don't, then you're going to get old and slowly fall to pieces anyway. So lots of really cheery stuff in Ecclesiastes. Yay, Happy New Year! So why did Solomon write this again? And why is this in the Bible? He was moved to write it by a mind painfully aware of the disappointing nature of things viewed apart from God. This is what happens when you look at the world and take God out of the equation. This is what you see when you look at things apart from God. And what I realized this time reading Ecclesiastes was it's really important to read Ecclesiastes in one go, because it is like one big essay and it has this conclusion at the end. And if you just read it, if you read it like a chapter a day, for however many days you read that, you would be depressed for those many days until you got to the conclusion. And his conclusion of the matter is this: fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind, for God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. So he says, effectively, looking at things under the sun doesn't work. It will only make you miserable. You need to look to God. You need to live in a way that pleases him to be truly happy. Because with God, wisdom is of true value. Earthly wisdom that Solomon hunted around for and went, nah, that's not very good, but godly wisdom is of true value, and it can actually bring happiness. With God, you can enjoy things more. He said that actually knowing God helps you to enjoy things on earth, because you view them as gifts. Work can be enjoyable, because your whole view of work changes. It says in Colossians 3:23-24, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for man, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ. So it's saying, when you work, even if your boss completely unappreciates you, if your colleagues don't appreciate you, don't work for them, work for God, because he's going to see your heart, he's going to see your attitude, he's going to see how hard you've worked and everything you put into it, and ultimately, he's going to say, oh, well done, you did a great job. Even if your earthly boss doesn't, he knows how hard you've worked, he knows what you've gone through and what you've put in and all that effort. And that completely changes the way you work. It makes your work enjoyable. And if you can enjoy your work, then it says that this is a gift from God. And sure, work is going to be hard sometimes because, the fall. But work was there before the fall too. As soon as God created Adam and Eve, he said, go, name things, do gardening, look after the animals, all this kind of stuff. He put them to work. So work was a pre-fall thing that got messed up kind of by the fall, where it's like, well, you're going to have to toil harder than you would have before. But work in itself is actually a good thing. And I fully believe that when we get to heaven, there's going to be work there. I think that everything that you've done and all your experience on earth and all the things you've gone through will have payoff in heaven. That, there'll be like the world's biggest worship band for Sam to jam along with. There'll be people like a massive choir for Heather to get involved with. Ryan will have the most amazing, mind-boggling, universe-explaining maths that we'll have to play with for years. There'll be all this sorts of stuff that will just make sense. And we go like, oh, okay, so, all that time spent doing... Oh, goodness me. Yeah. But it will pay off. And justice, knowing that God is ultimately going to judge everything, means that even if people get let off of things here on earth, it's a reprieve. It's not a final sentence. People will ultimately have to answer to God for all they've done, whether good or bad. If they've done evil things, they will ultimately pay for those. And what I think we sometimes fail to notice is whether good or evil. I don't know about you, but we tend to, when we hear judgment, you tend to people punished for the bad things that they've done. Judgment can be good too. Judgment isn't just revelation. Judgment is Genesis. Judgment is God creating things and on every day going, wow, that's really good. I like that. That's awesome. Judgment is the Holy Spirit descending on Jesus at his baptism and God saying, this is my son, I'm well proud. That's judgment too. And many of you would have read the book Imagine Heaven, and in that they talk about when you die having this sort of life review. And it's not going to be sort of all the bad things that you've done if you're a Christian, because Jesus has sorted those things. It's going to be, here's your highlights, here's your hit list, almost probably, of all the things that you've done. And I don't want that to be a really short conversation, if you know what I mean. I don't want Jesus to stand there, well, here's the one thing you did that one year, that one time. I want Jesus to be, oh, you did this, and this was cool. You did that. I loved how you led worship. I loved all the energies you put into planning that preach. I loved how you helped out those young people or spent time with those old people. I love how you ran around with Santa like a lunatic. All this kind of stuff, Jesus, I want to be there going, oh, you did this, and that was cool. And that was brilliant. And I was really proud of when you did that, because this is my son, and I'm well proud of you. That's what all of us hope to hear when we speak to Jesus in heaven too. And so I just encourage you, don't just think of judgment as that, like getting for the bad things that have happened, but actually it's getting praise for the good things you've done and getting acknowledgement. And Jesus going, I really loved it when you did that. So there's that. Wealth, when God gives someone wealth or possessions, knowing that changes your opinion of them. You don't view them as, here's that thing that I worked for and I must keep to myself. You view them as gifts. You view them as things which you steward and you are looking after, and things that you can help to bless other people with. And yeah, it changes your attitude towards it, and you can enjoy them as opposed to, I think it was like Notorious B.I.G. who said, mo money, mo problems. If you're a Christian, you've got mo money, more opportunity, I guess, to do good for the kingdom. But yeah, so all of it changes because God's in the equation. And back to that rhetorical question of, is there anything which one can say, look, this is something new? The answer to that is in Isaiah, where God says, look, I'm doing a new thing. Now it springs up, do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. And what this verse was pointing to was Jesus. He said, I am going to do something new. I'm going to do something completely mind-boggling. I'm going to put on flesh and dwell among you. And that is going to change everything. 2,000 years ago, Jesus stepped into our world and took on the sin of everyone and died on a cross, promising it is finished, it is done. Because of Jesus, the other stuff that Solomon says, like everyone dies, it could happen at any moment, life's full of unpredictability, and if not anytime soon, then you're just going to grow old and slowly fall apart anyway, all of which is still true. It's not the end, though. It's not the final word, because ultimately, yeah, your earthly body may fail, but you've got a body 2.0 waiting for you in heaven. You get to go to new earth and be with Jesus. And all of that is awesome and encouraging. So my challenge for you today is, where are you looking? The Ecclesiastes Blues is what happens when, I would say, you look at the news or you look at Facebook more than you look at Jesus. It's what happens when you look at worldly things and not look at kingdom things. It's when you look at the temporal and not the eternal. And so I would encourage you, certainly this January, if you are feeling a bit, remind yourself of what Jesus has said. Remind yourself of his promises. Remind yourself of all the things that he says are coming that are good. And I would ask you to ask yourself as well, where are you putting your energy? Are you trying to catch smoke with your bare hands? Or are you, by throwing yourself into work, by accumulating wealth or seeking fleeting pleasures? Or are you spending your time seeking the things of the kingdom? So I would encourage you, invest in the eternal, store up treasures in heaven, like it says in the New Testament. So when it comes to Judgment Day and you're standing there with Jesus having your life review, he says, well done, good job, I'm proud of you, that was really good, I love you, that was amazing. And I don't know about you, but that's what I want. And so I would encourage you, think kingdom, think bigger, don't get, someone said at one point about, as Christians, you should have the newspaper in one hand and the Bible in the other. So you're sort of, able to relevantly pray for things. But also, if you just have the other one, you're going to go and be really miserable. So just bear all that in mind. Seek things of the kingdom. God is good and has good things in store for you. So if you're feeling a bit meh, remember that. You are loved by God, and he gave everything to save you. Yes, I'm going to pray, and then I'll hand back to Sam. I'm not going to Kohan again, because that's probably a terrible idea. But yeah, if you want to stand, I'll pray, and then hand back to Sam. So yeah, Father, thank you that you stepped into earth and took on the sin of the world to fix so many of the problems which Solomon points out. Thank you that with you, all the stuff that from an earthly point of view looks rubbish, with you becomes beautiful. That actually you reveal the beauty in the seasons, the beauty in time, the beauty in all things. And I pray that you'd help us to see your beauty in all that is around us, not to see the earthly, but to see the kingdom, to see the eternal things, and help us to put our energies into things that will help build us treasures in heaven, that will be things that help you to say, yeah, that was really good when you did that. Encourage us and spur us on during these sort of slightly more miserable, dreary seasons. And yeah, just thank you for all that you have done and are doing with us. Amen.